First of all, I'd like to acknowledge the First Nations people on whose land we meet today and pay respect to elders past, present and those who are yet to come. And obviously acknowledging the strong women who are standing against male violence against women and demanding safe spaces for women and girls. Sisters Inside is an NGO that advocates for the human rights of women and girls who are currently in prison, who may be on remand awaiting to be sentenced, or who have been in prison in the past. We deliver programs to women in prison and outside prison, and we also campaign globally and nationally to keep women out of prison. So my role there, I'm obviously a nurse and I work on the health support program, and I provide support primarily to women post-release from prison, but I also advocate for women to access healthcare while in prison. So the Human Rights Act is continually breached for women in prison because of the lack of access to health care. Okay. Today, today basically I want to talk about why sending women to prison does more harm than good, and what alternatives there are to that, and why we shouldn't be using prison as a default for women who are the survivors of violence and abuse or with mental health issues. The number of women being sent to prison continues to grow at an alarming rate. In the past 10 years, the number of women being sent to prison has increased at a faster rate than the number of men being sent to prison. The male prison population during the past 10 years increased by 45%, while the female population has increased by 64%, growing in number from 2,100 to 3,500. Of concern is the high number of First Nations women being sent to prison who are more likely to be arrested for public nuisance offences or minor crimes than non-First Nations women. Currently, First Nations women make up 33% of the prison population, while comprising just 2% of the broader population. And from our work here in South East Queensland and in North Queensland, that data is totally backed up time and time again. In South East Queensland, we have 4 female prisons, and the most recent was opened in 2018. That was out at Gatton, and that's actually run by Serco. It's a private prison. So Serco has a horrendous history of human rights violations with people in detention and prisons. So hopefully this year it appears that it will become a public prison by June, July. There have been a number of concerns coming out of Gatton, and one of those has been in relation to health issues. A number of the women have been suffering major infections that have resulted in complex surgeries, and in some cases have left women with lifelong disabilities. While at this point in time we haven't been able to establish the true cause of these infections, what we have been able to identify is that the contributing factor lies in the lack of access to healthcare in an appropriate time frame and the negligent actions of Serco. The experience of women at Gatton is an example of how a short time in prison can have a negative impact on women's lives and health. The reality is that the prison industry is $1 billion industry, where there is 10 times the amount spent on imprisoning women than on providing support services such as housing, education and health. Research indicates that women are receiving more severe responses to relatively minor crimes. That is, crimes that might have once resulted in a suspended sentence or a community-based order could now see a woman receiving a short imprisonment time. Unfortunately, even a short time in prison has a profound effect on a woman. They could lose their children, who are then placed in care, which leads to anxiety and grief that is lifelong, and the process of re-establishing contact with these children is extremely problematic. They will probably lose their homes, and if they have a job, they will lose their job as well. At the moment, I'm actually advocating for a woman who, at the age of 70, that is 70, has been sent to prison for the first time for a minor offence. Now, this woman is chronically unwell. She is in a wheelchair. Her health has a very poor prognosis, and this possibly for this woman would have been that she would have served that sentence in the community at another time. So the question has to be asked as to what benefit is that, apart from benefiting the prison industry, is it to send her to prison? It is impossible to talk about criminalised women without examining the factors that contribute to their offending. The criminogenic profile of women in prison is profoundly different to that of male prisoners. Perhaps the most important difference relates to the women's past experience of violence. Repeated studies have found that 95% of women prisoners in Australia are victims of abuse. The crimes that women are imprisoned for differ vastly from the crimes men commit. The majority of crimes committed by women are low-level or poverty-related crimes, and women who are sentenced for more serious crimes, it is usually as a result of women having to fight back in self-defence after years of abuse. The average age of a woman in prison is 34. 70% are classed as minimum or medium security risk. Another issue is that women with acquired brain injuries are now being sent to prison. A recent survey established that 36% of the female prison population reported having a head injury or loss of consciousness prior to going to prison. And this was often as a result of physical assaults, strangulations, or strangulations by partners and ex-partners. Obviously, the prison environment would be problematic and stressful for a woman with an ABI. On a whole, women in prison tend to have poorer health than the general community, including higher levels of certain physical conditions, chronic disease and communicable diseases, as well as mental health and substance misuse. Female prisoners have different health and well-being needs for male prisoners. Women may enter a prison with reproductive health needs, including while pregnant, or they may find out that they're pregnant while in prison. So therefore they require female-specific health care. Women in prison can have multiple and complex needs that require ongoing and long-term care, not only while in prison, but for appropriate post-release planning. While the number of women being sent to prison grows, this increase will not decrease until society starts to properly address the basis to physical and sexual abuse and disadvantage, which affects an overwhelming majority of women behind bars. The reality is that women are survivors of abuse and violence, and they are being locked up in prison when they should be supported in the community. We must look at alternatives to sending women to prison. Instead of spending billions on new prisons, these funds could be channelled into funding women's centres, where women and young girls could go to instead of being sent to the watch house if picked up by the police for a minor offence. And last year we actually saw an older woman picked up for a minor offence who languished in the watch house for 4 days until she died. We need to look at secure, adequate, independent incomes for women, so not reliant on abusive male partners. Stable, safe public housing, mental health and community health support, and safe spaces and refuges for women and girls so they can escape their abusers. By relying on prison, we are effectively abandoning women, and the call for greater incarceration and stronger laws adversely affects Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women. Feminism that sees prison as the answer is no friend to our most marginalised women. While reforms seek to make prisons nicer, they ultimately keep the prison industrial complex in place and women oppressed. To build a world where prisons are not seen as a solution to social disadvantage experienced by women is to disrupt a society built on inequity, patriarchal violence and colonisation. It is a fight for a world where women and girls are not treated as second class just for being born female, and a world where the abuse, rape and murder of women and girls is not seen as commonplace. And finally, a world where prison isn't used as a default solution for women who are the survivors of violence and abuse. Thank you.
Thanks, Erin. I've heard you speak a few times.